The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of the royal courtyard, as Catherine, Duchess of Cambridge, stood quietly by the tall windows of Kensington Palace. Her fingers traced the cold glass while she watched the early morning staff preparing for what would become one of the most emotionally charged days in recent royal history. The weight of the coming announcement pressed heavily on her shoulders, though she maintained the composed grace that had become her trademark over the years. Prince William emerged from his study, his usually confident stride replaced by something more hesitant. The documents in his hands rustled softly as he approached his wife, and for a moment, neither spoke. They had discussed this decision countless times over the past months, weighing every consequence, every ripple effect it would have on their children, their duties, and the monarchy itself. Yet now, faced with the reality of making it public, the magnitude felt overwhelming. "The children are asking questions," Catherine said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Charlotte noticed the extra security briefings. George heard fragments of our late-night conversations. She turned from the window to face William, her eyes reflecting a mixture of determination and uncertainty. They know something significant is happening even if they don't understand what. William set the papers on a nearby table and moved closer to his wife. The morning light illuminated the stress lines that had appeared around his eyes over recent weeks. "We've always promised them honesty," he replied, his voice steady but carrying an undertone of emotion. "They deserve to hear this from us before the world does." The decision they faced wasn't one that appeared in any royal protocol manual. After years of dedicated service, countless public engagements, and unwavering commitment to their roles, William and Catherine had reached a crossroads that would forever alter their path. The constant scrutiny, the relentless pressure, and the growing concerns about their children's privacy had culminated in a choice that would shock the nation and the Commonwealth. Catherine moved away from the window and sat in her favorite armchair, the same one where she had nursed each of their children during those precious early months. "Do you remember when we first moved here?" she asked, her gaze drifting around the familiar room. Everything felt so permanent then, so certain. "We thought we had decades to gradually ease into our roles." "The world changed faster than we anticipated," William acknowledged, settling into the chair across from her. "The media landscape, social expectations, the children's needs, everything accelerated beyond what we prepared for." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "My grandmother understood duty above all else, but she also understood that duty must evolve with the times." The couple had spent months consulting with advisors, family members, and trusted friends. Some supported their decision, understanding the personal toll their positions had taken. Others expressed concern about the precedent it might set, and the potential impact on public trust in the monarchy. Through it all, William and Catherine had remained united in their conviction that their choice, while difficult, was necessary for their family's well-being. As the morning progressed, staff members moved through the palace with unusual urgency. Press secretaries reviewed statements, security personnel coordinated additional measures, and senior advisors made final preparations for what would become a historic announcement. The couple's children remained unaware of the storm that would soon surround them, playing in their rooms while their parents prepared to change their lives forever. Catherine stood and walked to William's desk, picking up a framed photograph of their family taken during a recent private vacation. In the image, they appeared relaxed and genuinely happy, free from the formal constraints of their public roles. "This is what we're protecting," she said, holding the frame so William could see it. These moments of normalcy, of being just a family. The weight of their decision extended beyond personal considerations. William, as second in line to the throne, understood the constitutional implications of their choice. Yet he also recognized that the monarchy's survival depended on its ability to adapt to changing times and acknowledge human limitations. Their announcement would undoubtedly generate controversy, but it might also demonstrate a level of authenticity that could ultimately strengthen public connection to the royal family. Outside, protesters had already begun gathering near the palace gates, though they didn't yet know what they were protesting. Social media buzzed with speculation as rumors spread about an impending announcement. News vans lined the surrounding streets, their satellite dishes reaching toward the gray London sky like modern-day weather vanes sensing the approaching storm. Back inside, Catherine and William sat together in contemplative silence. each lost in their own thoughts about the journey that had brought them to this moment. Their love story had captivated the world, from their university meeting to their fairy tale wedding watched by millions. Now they were about to demonstrate that even fairy tales sometimes require difficult choices to protect what matters most. The clock on the mantelpiece chimed 10, signaling that in just 2 hours they would step before the cameras and change everything. Their hands found each other naturally, fingers interlacing in a gesture that had become second nature over their years together. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else, together with grace, and with unwavering commitment to each other and their children. As Catherine squeezed William's hand, she thought about the embrace they would share after the announcement, knowing that moment would be captured by dozens of cameras and seen around the world. It would become a symbol of their decision, not an ending but a transformation, a choice made with love and courage in the face of unprecedented circumstances. The palace corridors echoed with hurried footsteps as senior staff prepared for the unprecedented announcement. Private Secretary Simon Case moved between rooms with practiced efficiency, coordinating with press officers while maintaining the careful balance of discretion that royal protocol demanded. Yet even he, with decades of experience managing royal communications, felt the unusual tension that permeated Kensington Palace that morning. In the nursery, Prince George sat at his small desk, attempting to focus on his mathematics homework, while the sound of increased activity filtered through the walls. His younger sister Charlotte played nearby with her collection of toy horses, occasionally glancing toward the window where additional security personnel had taken positions throughout the morning. Prince Louis, still too young to understand the significance of the day's events, built elaborate towers with his wooden blocks, knocking them down with gleeful laughter. The children's nanny, Maria Teresa Tyrion Barallo, maintained her usual calm demeanor, despite the obvious changes in routine. She had been with the family since George was 8 months old and had witnessed their growth through countless public appearances and private moments. Today, however, she sensed something different in the way Catherine had looked at her children during breakfast, lingering a bit longer with each hug and kiss. Downstairs, Catherine reviewed her appearance one final time in the mirror of her private dressing room. The navy blue dress she had chosen was elegant yet understated, suitable for the gravity of the occasion without appearing overly formal. Her stylist had suggested minimal jewelry, just her engagement ring and simple pearl earrings that had belonged to William's mother, Princess Diana. Every detail had been carefully considered to convey the right message. William paced in his study, rehearsing the words they would speak to the nation. The statement had been crafted over several weeks, with input from constitutional experts and communication specialists. Yet despite the careful preparation, he knew that once they stepped before the cameras, they would be speaking from their hearts as much as from the prepared text. The world would be watching not just their words, but their demeanor, their body language, and the emotion in their eyes. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Catherine entered, her presence immediately calming his restless energy. "The children want to see us before we go," she said gently. "They've been asking questions all morning." Together they climbed the stairs to the nursery, where their 3 children waited with barely contained curiosity. George, now old enough to sense the importance of adult conversations he wasn't quite included in, looked particularly thoughtful. Charlotte bounced on her toes with nervous energy, while Louis continued his block construction with the focused concentration only small children possess. "We need to tell you something important," William began, settling onto the carpet where Louis was playing. Catherine joined him, creating an intimate family circle that felt both natural and profound. "Today, Mummy and Daddy are going to talk to lots of people about some changes in our family." Charlotte's eyes widened with immediate concern. "Are we moving again?" she asked, remembering their previous relocations and the disruption they had caused to her friendships and familiar routines. "Not exactly," Catherine replied, pulling her daughter closer. "We're going to step back from some of our royal duties so we can spend more time together as a family." She paused, searching for words that would reassure, rather than worry them. Sometimes even grown-ups need to make changes to take better care of the people they love most. George, with the perceptiveness that often surprised his parents, asked quietly, "Will people be angry with us?" William's heart clenched at his son's question, recognizing the burden of public opinion that already weighed on his eldest child's young shoulders. Some people might not understand at first, he answered honestly. But we believe that being honest about what our family needs is always the right choice, even when it's difficult. The family spent several more minutes together, the children asking questions while their parents provided gentle, age-appropriate explanations. When it was time to leave for the press conference, the embraces were longer than usual, each parent holding their children with an intensity that spoke to the magnitude of the moment. As they walked toward the room where the media waited, Catherine and William moved in synchronized steps that reflected their years of partnership. The weight of their decision no longer felt burdensome. Instead, it felt liberating. They were about to reclaim agency over their lives in a way that few members of the royal family had ever attempted. Behind the closed doors, they could hear the murmur of assembled journalists, photographers, and camera operators. News outlets from around the world had sent their most experienced royal correspondents, sensing that this announcement would be historically significant. Social media platforms buzzed with speculation, hashtags trending as the public tried to guess what revelation awaited. "Whatever happens next," William whispered to Catherine as they approached the door, "we face it together." Catherine nodded, her hand finding his with natural ease. "Together," she repeated, the word carrying all the weight of their shared commitment and love. The doors opened, and they stepped into the bright lights and expectant silence of the assembled media. In that moment, they were no longer just the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge fulfilling royal obligations. They were William and Catherine, a married couple who had made a profound decision about their future, ready to share their truth with the world and accept whatever consequences followed. The assembled media fell silent as William and Catherine entered the ornate reception room at Kensington Palace. Photographers' cameras clicked softly in the background while television cameras captured their every movement. The couple took their positions behind a mahogany podium adorned with the royal coat of arms, the familiar symbol that had governed their lives for over a decade. William cleared his throat and looked directly into the cameras, knowing that his words would reach millions of people across the Commonwealth and beyond. "Catherine and I have asked you here today to share a deeply personal decision we have made about our family's future." His voice was steady, but those who knew him well could detect the underlying emotion. "After much consideration and consultation with family members, we have decided to step back from our roles as senior working members of the royal family." The reaction was immediate and electric. Journalists shifted in their seats, some frantically taking notes while others whispered urgent updates to their newsrooms via earpieces. Camera shutters clicked rapidly, capturing every micro-expression on the couple's faces. This was the moment everyone had speculated about, but few had expected to actually witness. Catherine stepped closer to the microphone, her voice clear and composed despite the magnitude of what they were revealing. "This decision has not been made lightly. We have enormous respect for the institution of the monarchy and our grandmother, Her Majesty the Queen. However, we believe that stepping back will allow us to better serve our family and, ultimately, serve the causes we care about in a different way." The questions began almost immediately, reporters raising their hands with barely contained urgency. A veteran royal correspondent from the BBC was recognized first. "Your Royal Highnesses, can you elaborate on what specifically led to this decision? Was there a particular incident or mounting pressure that influenced your choice?" William exchanged a glance with Catherine before answering. "The constant scrutiny and pressure on our children played a significant role. We want them to have the opportunity to grow up with some semblance of privacy and normalcy. The intensity of public attention has reached a level that we feel is not sustainable for their healthy development." A reporter from The Times raised her hand next. "What will this mean practically? Will you retain your titles? Where will you live? How will you support yourselves financially?" "We will work out the practical details with the appropriate officials over the coming weeks," Catherine responded diplomatically. "Our priority right now is ensuring this transition is handled with dignity and respect for all parties involved. We remain committed to our charitable work and will continue supporting the causes close to our hearts, though in a different capacity." The questions continued for nearly an hour, each answer revealing more about the careful thought and planning that had gone into their decision. They spoke about their gratitude for the experiences they had been privileged to have, their deep affection for the British people, and their hope that their choice would ultimately strengthen rather than weaken the monarchy by demonstrating its ability to evolve with changing times. "Oh, Journalist from a tabloid. Newspaper posed a more provocative question. Some critics are already calling this selfish and irresponsible. How do you respond to accusations that you're abandoning your duty to the crown and the people? William's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained measured. We understand that not everyone will agree with our decision. However, we believe that serving effectively requires acknowledging our limitations and being honest about what we can sustainably provide. We hope that history will judge us not by our departure from tradition, but by our commitment to doing what we believe is right for our family and, in the long term, for the institution we love. Throughout the press conference, Catherine and William presented a united front. They finished each other's sentences, their body language reflecting the deep partnership that had sustained them through years of public service and personal challenges. When difficult questions arose, they supported each other with subtle gestures, a touch on the arm, a meaningful look, a slight smile of encouragement. As the formal questioning period drew to a close, a senior royal correspondent asked one final question. What message do you have for your supporters around the world who may feel disappointed or confused by this announcement? Catherine leaned forward slightly, her expression earnest and heartfelt. We want them to know that this decision comes from a place of love. Love for our children, love for each other, and ultimately love for the people we have been honored to serve. We are not disappearing. We are simply choosing a different path that we believe will allow us to contribute more authentically to the world. William nodded in agreement. Change is never easy, especially when it involves institutions and traditions that people hold dear. But we hope that our supporters will understand that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to be honest about your limitations and make choices that preserve what matters most. The press conference concluded with William and Catherine thanking the assembled media for their professionalism and expressing hope for continued respectful coverage as they navigated this transition. As they stepped away from the podium, the room erupted in a cacophony of voices as journalists immediately began filing their stories, and television correspondents started their live broadcasts. But in that moment, as William and Catherine walked toward each other away from the podium, something profound happened. The weight of years of obligation and expectation seemed to lift from their shoulders. They had spoken their truth, shared their decision, and now faced an uncertain but chosen future together. Their embrace, captured by dozens of cameras, would become the image that defined this historic moment. A gesture of mutual support, love, and shared courage in the face of unprecedented change. The embrace between William and Catherine lasted only seconds, but every photographer in the room recognized its significance. As they held each other, their faces reflected relief, love, and quiet determination. The image would later appear on front pages around the world, becoming an iconic representation of a couple choosing each other and their family over duty and tradition. Within minutes of the press conference's conclusion, the palace's communication systems were overwhelmed with incoming calls. News organizations demanded additional comments. Royal experts offered their analysis, and social media platforms exploded with reactions ranging from support to outrage. The hashtag royal decision began trending globally within the first hour, accompanied by thousands of opinions from people who felt deeply connected to the royal family's choices. In the private family quarters, William and Catherine returned to find their children exactly where they had left them, but the atmosphere had changed. Maria, their nanny, wore a knowing expression as she supervised the children's afternoon activities. She had worked for royal families long enough to understand the implications of increased security presence and the subtle tension that preceded major announcements. "How did it go?" 8-year-old George asked with the directness that often surprised adults. He had inherited his father's ability to cut through complexity and focus on essential truths. Catherine knelt beside her eldest son, taking his hands in hers. "We told everyone about our decision to spend more time as a family. Some people are happy for us and others are still trying to understand why we made this choice." Charlotte looked up from her coloring book. Her crayon paused mid-stroke. "Will we still live here?" she asked, her voice carrying the concern of a child who had already experienced multiple relocations in her young life. "For now, yes," William answered, settling into a chair beside her small table. "But we might have more choices about where we spend our time and how we spend it." The afternoon brought a steady stream of visitors and phone calls. Prince Charles arrived first, his expression reflecting the complex emotions of a father and future king, grappling with his son's unprecedented decision. The conversation was private, but palace staff noted that he spent considerable time with his grandchildren, playing games and reading stories with unusual focus and attention. Queen Elizabeth II requested a private meeting, which took place in the late afternoon. The encounter was formal yet emotional, characterized by the deep mutual respect that had developed between the Queen and her grandson over the years. She had lived through numerous constitutional crises and family challenges, but this situation was uniquely modern, requiring wisdom that drew from both tradition and innovation. "I cannot say I entirely understand your choice," the Queen told William and Catherine during their meeting. "But I have always believed that the strength of our family lies in our ability to adapt to changing circumstances while preserving what matters most. You have my support, though this path will not be without challenges." Catherine felt tears forming as she listened to the Queen's words. The older woman had become not just a sovereign but a grandmother figure, someone whose approval meant more than public opinion polls or media commentary. "Your Majesty, we hope that our decision ultimately serves the long-term interests of the monarchy, even if it appears disruptive in the short term." Meanwhile, across Britain and the Commonwealth nations, people gathered around televisions and computer screens, watching endless replays of the press conference and analyzing every word and gesture. Pubs buzzed with debate, social media feeds filled with passionate arguments, and talk radio shows were flooded with callers expressing everything from admiration to betrayal. Sarah Matthews, a teacher from Manchester, told her local news station, "I think they're brave. Being in the spotlight constantly, having your children photographed everywhere they go, that's not normal or healthy. They're putting their family first, and I respect that." Conversely, retired military officer James Harrison expressed a different view to reporters outside Buckingham Palace. They accepted privileges and responsibilities when they married into the royal family. You can't just walk away when things get difficult. This sets a dangerous precedent for future generations. The international reaction was equally divided. American media outlets largely portrayed the decision as a modern fairy tale couple, choosing love over obligation, while European newspapers focused more on the constitutional implications and the potential precedent for other monarchies facing similar pressures. Back at Kensington Palace, evening brought relative quiet. The children had been fed dinner and were beginning their bedtime routines, seemingly unaware that their parents' announcement had dominated news cycles around the world. For them, the most significant change was that both William and Catherine were home for bedtime stories, an increasingly rare occurrence in recent months. As they tucked George into bed, he asked quietly, "Daddy, are you sad about not being a prince anymore?" William sat on the edge of his son's bed, considering how to answer honestly while providing reassurance. "I'll always be your father's son and your grandfather's son, which makes me a prince in the ways that matter most. But sometimes being the best prince means making choices that help your family be happy and healthy." In Charlotte's room, Catherine faced similar questions as she braided her daughter's hair for the night. "Will people still like us?" Charlotte asked, her eyes wide with concern. "The people who truly care about us will understand that we made this choice out of love," Catherine replied gently, "and those are the people whose opinions matter most." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, William and Catherine sat together in their private sitting room, finally alone with their thoughts and emotions. The television played silently in the background, showing endless analysis and commentary about their announcement. They had chosen to mute the sound, preferring to process the day's events in quiet conversation, rather than through the lens of media interpretation. "Do you regret anything about how we handled today?" Catherine asked, curling up beside William on their favorite sofa. William pulled her closer, his arm wrapping around her shoulders in a gesture that had become natural over their years together. "No," he said firmly. "We were honest, respectful, and clear about our reasoning. Whatever happens next, we can face it knowing we acted with integrity." The embrace they shared in that private moment was different from the one captured by photographers earlier in the day. This one was longer, deeper, filled with the relief of people who had finally spoken their truth and were ready to face whatever consequences awaited them together. The morning after their announcement brought an unusual stillness to Kensington Palace. For the first time in years, William and Catherine's schedule wasn't packed with official engagements, ribbon cuttings, and state functions. Instead, they woke to the sound of their children playing in the garden, their laughter drifting through windows that usually framed a world of protocol and obligation. Catherine stood at the kitchen window, watching George teach Louis how to kick a football while Charlotte organized an elaborate tea party for her stuffed animals. The scene was so wonderfully ordinary that it brought tears to her eyes. When was the last time she had been able to observe her children's play without worrying about security briefings or photographers lurking in nearby trees?
Second thoughts?
William asked gently, appearing beside her with 2 cups of coffee. He had been up since dawn, reading through the mountain of messages that had arrived overnight from family members, friends, and officials trying to understand and navigate the implications of their decision. Not about the decision itself, Catherine replied, accepting the warm mug gratefully. But I'm thinking about what comes next. We've never not been working royals in our married life. I'm not entirely sure who we are without the schedules and obligations. William nodded thoughtfully. He had been grappling with similar feelings of uncertainty mixed with relief. I keep reaching for my daily briefing papers and remembering that there aren't any today. No state dinners to prepare for. No speeches to memorize. No carefully choreographed public appearances. The phone rang almost constantly throughout the morning. Their private secretary fielded most calls, but some required personal attention. Catherine spoke with the patron organizations she had worked with for years, explaining her decision and discussing transition plans. Many expressed understanding and support, though a few were clearly disappointed by the disruption to planned events and initiatives. One particularly meaningful call came from Mary Berry, the beloved television baker who had worked with Catherine on several charitable projects. "My dear," Mary said warmly, "I think you've shown tremendous courage. Family must come first, and anyone who's watched you with those children knows what a devoted mother you are." William spent time on the phone with his father, discussing the practical implications of their decision. The conversation was more comfortable than he had expected, with Charles revealing his own struggles with balancing public duty and personal fulfillment. "During his decades of waiting to become king, I won't pretend I'm not concerned about the precedent this sets," Charles admitted. "But I've also watched you both navigate pressures that I never faced at your age. The media landscape, social media, the 24-hour news cycle, it's relentless in ways we couldn't have imagined. The children seemed largely unaffected by the monumental changes occurring around them. They attended their regular lessons with their tutors, played in the palace gardens, and enjoyed extended time with both parents for the first time in months. George, however, was old enough to sense the significance of the media attention and asked increasingly sophisticated questions about what their family's future would look like. "Will we still be able to help people?" he asked during lunch, referring to the charitable visits that had been a regular part of his young life. "Absolutely," William assured him. "We'll just help people in different ways, maybe ways that allow us to spend more time really getting to know the communities we're working with instead of rushing between official events." The afternoon brought their first glimpse of public reaction beyond news, reports, and social media trends. A small crowd had gathered outside the palace gates, and while most were simply curious tourists, some held signs expressing support for the family's decision. One particularly touching message read, "Thank you for choosing love over duty. You're still our royals." However, there were also protesters expressing disappointment and anger. Some carried signs calling their decision selfish and irresponsible, while others questioned their commitment to the British people. The mixed reaction was exactly what William and Catherine had anticipated, but seeing it in person still felt emotionally challenging. Royal protection officers briefed them on necessary security adjustments. While they would retain some level of protection due to their position in the line of succession, the intensity and scope would be significantly reduced. This meant more freedom of movement but also more personal responsibility for their family's safety. "It feels strange to think about grocery shopping without a security detail," Catherine mused as they walked through the palace gardens that evening. "I'm not sure I remember how to be inconspicuous." "We'll figure it out together," William replied, taking her hand as they strolled past the flower beds that Charlotte loved to help the gardeners tend. "Everything we're doing now is about learning to be ourselves without the constant weight of royal expectations." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of their private secretary, who carried a leather portfolio filled with correspondence that had arrived throughout the day. Messages of support far outnumbered critical letters, with many coming from other parents who understood the challenges of protecting children's privacy in the modern world. One letter that particularly moved Catherine came from a single mother in Wales who wrote,
"Your Royal Highness, I've been following your family for years.
"And today you showed that even princesses have to make difficult choices to protect their children. Thank you for reminding us that being a good parent sometimes means disappointing other people." As evening approached, the family gathered in their private sitting room for what had become an impromptu tradition since the announcement, extended time together without the pressure of preparing for the next day's official obligations. William read adventure stories to Louis while Catherine helped Charlotte with an art project. George alternated between working on a puzzle and asking thoughtful questions about their family's changing circumstances. "Are we still going to live like a royal family?" Charlotte asked as Catherine helped her select colored pencils for her drawing. "We'll always be part of the royal family," Catherine explained patiently, "but we might live more like other families do, with more choices about how we spend our time and more privacy to just be ourselves." The evening concluded, with all three children joining their parents in the master bedroom for an extended bedtime story session, something that had been nearly impossible to arrange during their busy period of official duties. As William read from a beloved children's book about adventure and friendship, Catherine marveled at how such a simple activity felt like a luxury after years of rigid scheduling. Later, as they prepared for bed, Catherine and William reflected on their first full day of their new life. The future remained uncertain. They had financial considerations to address, living arrangements to determine, and a new relationship with the media and public to establish. But for the first time in years, those challenges felt manageable because they were facing them on their own terms, with their family's well-being as the primary priority, rather than just one consideration among many competing obligations. 3 weeks after their announcement, William and Catherine were beginning to understand the true complexity of extracting themselves from royal duties while maintaining their dignity and relationships with family members. The initial media frenzy had subsided somewhat, but the practical implications of their decision were proving more challenging than either had anticipated. Their morning routine had transformed completely. Instead of reviewing briefing papers about upcoming state visits or charity engagements, William found himself researching private schools, and Catherine spent time investigating potential homes outside London, where they might relocate for greater privacy. The children had adapted remarkably well to having both parents available for breakfast every morning, something that had been rare during their years of intensive royal duties. "Mummy, why are there still photographers outside?" Charlotte asked one morning as she noticed the persistent media presence beyond the palace gates. Catherine paused in spreading jam on her daughter's toast, choosing her words carefully. "People are still very interested in our family because of all the years we spent doing royal jobs. It will take time for that attention to decrease." The financial aspects of their transition had required extensive consultation with advisors and legal experts. While they would lose their taxpayer-funded allowances, they still had access to personal wealth inherited from Diana's estate and investments made over the years. However, they were determined to become financially independent as quickly as possible, exploring various options for generating income that wouldn't compromise their dignity or exploit their former royal status. Catherine had been approached by several publishers interested in a memoir about her experience as a working royal, but she felt uncomfortable with the idea of monetizing stories that involved other family members and private moments. Instead, she was exploring opportunities to write about childhood development and parenting, subjects she felt passionate about and could address without betraying royal confidences. William was considering various options, including work with conservation organizations and potentially returning to his former career as a search and rescue pilot. The idea of returning to work that had given him such satisfaction before his marriage was increasingly appealing, though it would require additional training to update his certifications. The most difficult aspect of their transition was navigating relationships with other members of the royal family. While Queen Elizabeth II had expressed understanding and support, other relatives were less diplomatic about their disappointment. Some cousins felt that William and Catherine's decision reflected poorly on their own choices to maintain traditional royal roles despite personal costs. Prince Harry contacted them from California, where he and Meghan had relocated after their own departure from royal duties. His call was both supportive and cautionary, sharing insights about the challenges they would face in establishing independence while remaining connected to the royal family. The hardest part isn't the media attention or the public criticism, Harry told William during a lengthy phone conversation. It's maintaining relationships with family members who feel you've abandoned them, even when you're trying to preserve your mental health and protect your children. Catherine found herself particularly missing her patronages and the charitable work that had given her such purpose over the years. She had been passionate about early childhood development and had worked extensively with organizations supporting vulnerable children. Walking away from those commitments felt like abandoning people who had counted on her advocacy and support. One afternoon, she received a surprise visit from Dame Julia Cleverdon, a veteran of the charity sector who had worked with multiple generations of royals. The older woman's advice was both practical and encouraging. "Your Royal Highness," Dame Julia said over tea in Catherine's private sitting room, "your impact on these causes doesn't end because you're no longer a working royal. In many ways, you might have more freedom to advocate effectively without the constraints of political neutrality and protocol." This perspective helped Catherine begin to envision ways she might continue her charitable work while protecting her family's privacy. She started researching models used by other public figures who had successfully balanced advocacy work with personal boundaries. The children's adjustment remained remarkably positive, though they occasionally asked questions that revealed their growing understanding of how significantly their lives were changing. George, in particular, seemed to grasp that his future path would be different from what had once been assumed. "Will I still be king someday?" he asked William one evening as they worked together on a model airplane. William paused, considering how to answer honestly while remaining age-appropriate. "That's still possible, but it might be very far in the future, and things might be different by then. Right now, the most important thing is that you grow up to be a good person who cares about others." Public opinion polling showed that while initial reactions had been mixed, support for their decision was growing as people had time to consider the pressures modern royals face. Many parents in particular expressed admiration for William and Catherine's willingness to prioritize their children's well-being over public expectations. However, some constitutional experts continued to express concern about the precedent their decision might set. If royals could simply choose to step back when duties became burdensome, what did that mean for the stability and continuity of the monarchy? These were questions that would likely be debated for years to come. The evening news had become a nightly ritual for William and Catherine, not out of vanity, but from necessity. They needed to understand how their story was being portrayed and what narratives were developing around their choice. Most coverage had become more balanced over time, with many commentators acknowledging the unique pressures of modern royal life. One particularly insightful documentary aired on the BBC, featuring interviews with former royal staff members and constitutional historians. The program explored how the monarchy had adapted to changing times throughout history, suggesting that William and Catherine's decision might represent another necessary evolution rather than a crisis. "Every generation of royals has faced pressures their predecessors couldn't have imagined," one historian observed. "The Duke and Duchess are navigating challenges created by social media, 24-hour news cycles, and unprecedented public scrutiny of their children. Their response may seem radical, but it's actually quite traditional in its focus on family preservation." As the weeks passed, William and Catherine began to feel more confident about their choice. The initial panic about having made a terrible mistake had faded, replaced by a growing sense of peace about the path they had chosen. Their children seemed happier and more relaxed, no longer constantly aware of being observed and photographed. Catherine started volunteering at a local community center, working with young mothers in a capacity that felt more personal and immediate than her previous royal engagements. Without the formal protocols and media attention, she could develop genuine relationships and provide support in ways that had been impossible as a working royal. William began the process of requalifying as a pilot, spending hours studying updated aviation regulations and safety procedures. The intellectual challenge was invigorating, and the prospect of returning to work that had personal meaning rather than symbolic importance filled him with excitement he hadn't felt in years. Their marriage, too, seemed to benefit from the reduced pressure and increased time together. They had fallen in love as young adults with dreams and ambitions beyond royal duty, and now they were rediscovering those aspects of their relationship that had been overshadowed by official obligations. One evening, as they walked hand in hand through Kensington Gardens after the tourists had departed, Catherine reflected on how much had changed since their announcement. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked William. "The sense of purpose that came with representing the Queen in the country?" William considered her question carefully. "I miss feeling useful in that particular way," he admitted. "But I'm starting to understand that there are many ways to serve, and some of them might be more authentic to who we really are as people." Their conversation was interrupted by George running toward them, having escaped from Maria's supervision during an evening walk. His face was flushed with excitement from playing football with other children in the park, children who knew who he was but treated him as just another playmate rather than a royal celebrity. "Can we stay out here longer?" George asked breathlessly. "Tommy's mom said they might have fish and chips for dinner, and she invited us to join them." Catherine and William exchanged glances, both recognizing the significance of such a normal, spontaneous invitation. For their son to have friends who saw him as a regular child, rather than a future king, was exactly what they had hoped to achieve through their difficult decision. "Let's ask Maria if that would be all right," Catherine replied, squeezing George's hand. "Fish and chips sounds lovely." As they walked toward the small group of families gathering near the playground, William felt a profound sense of rightness about their choice. This was what they had been trying to protect and preserve, the possibility of ordinary moments, genuine friendships and spontaneous joys that didn't need to be scheduled, documented, or approved by palace officials. 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of a modest Georgian farmhouse in Norfolk, a far cry from the grand chambers of Kensington Palace. Catherine hummed softly as she prepared breakfast in a kitchen where she could work without staff hovering nearby, where the children could grab snacks without protocol, and where family meals happened around a simple wooden table rather than in formal dining rooms. The transition had been more challenging than either William or Catherine had initially anticipated, but it had also been more rewarding. The media attention had gradually decreased as other news captured public interest, though they remained subjects of fascination for royal watchers around the world. More importantly, they had begun to establish the life they had envisioned when they made their dramatic announcement. William had successfully returned to aviation work, taking a position with East Anglian Air Ambulance that utilized his skills while serving the community in a directly meaningful way. The work was demanding and often emotionally difficult, but it provided him with a sense of purpose that felt authentic rather than symbolic. His colleagues treated him as simply another experienced pilot rather than a former royal, which was exactly what he had hoped to achieve. Catherine had found her calling in establishing a small non-profit organization focused on supporting rural families with young children. Working from a converted barn on their property, she was able to combine her passion for early childhood development with direct service to families who often lacked access to resources available in urban areas. The work was hands-on and immediate in ways that her royal patronages had never been. The children had adapted beautifully to their new life. George attended the local village school, where he was known simply as George Wales rather than Prince George. His teachers reported that he was a thoughtful, well-adjusted child who showed natural leadership qualities without the pressure of royal expectations. Charlotte and Louis thrived in an environment where they could play freely, make friends based on genuine connections, and explore their interests without constant security concerns. Their decision to relocate to Norfolk had been practical, as well as symbolic. The county held happy memories for William from his childhood visits to his great-grandmother's estate, and the rural setting provided the privacy and normalcy they sought for their children. The local community had been welcoming while respecting their desire for ordinary family life. One particularly meaningful morning, Catherine received a handwritten letter from Queen Elizabeth II, who had been following their transition with interest and concern. The Queen's words were warm and supportive, expressing pride in how gracefully they had managed their departure from royal duties while maintaining their dignity and family unity. "Your choice was difficult and unprecedented," the Queen wrote. but watching your family flourish has convinced me that it was also wise. The monarchy will endure, and your children will be better prepared for whatever roles they may choose to accept in the future because they will understand both duty and personal agency. William found the letter particularly moving because it represented acceptance from the one person whose opinion mattered most to him. His grandmother had devoted her entire life to royal service, yet she understood and respected his choice to prioritize his family's well-being over traditional expectations. The financial independence they had sought was gradually becoming reality. Catherine's non-profit work, while not personally lucrative, had attracted support from foundations and donors who admired her grassroots approach to social service. William's salary, combined with careful management of their personal resources, was proving sufficient for their simpler lifestyle. Perhaps most importantly, their marriage had strengthened in ways they hadn't expected. Without the constant pressure of public scrutiny and official obligations, they had rediscovered the partnership that had brought them together as university students. They could have disagreements, share doubts, and support each other through challenges without worrying about how their interactions might be perceived or reported. Their children noticed the change too. George commented one evening that his parents seemed happier and less tired than he remembered from their palace days. Charlotte observed that Mommy and Daddy laughed more often and were able to help with homework without constantly checking phones for urgent messages from palace staff. The public's perception of their decision had evolved significantly over the months. Initial criticism had largely given way to understanding and even admiration. Many families facing their own struggles with work life balance found inspiration in William and Catherine's willingness to prioritize their children's needs over external expectations. A year-end documentary about their transition featured interviews with local residents who had gotten to know the family as neighbors rather than celebrities. The vicar who had welcomed them to the village church spoke about their quiet contributions to community life. The headmaster of George's school described a family fully invested in their children's education and social development. On a cold December evening, as snow began to fall outside their farmhouse windows, William and Catherine sat by the fire while their children played board games nearby. The scene was cozy and intimate, filled with the easy contentment that had been rare during their years of royal duty. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, echoing the question she had posed months earlier but with different undertones. This time she wasn't asking out of uncertainty, but from genuine curiosity about William's reflection on their journey. William looked around their simple living room, watching George patiently teach Louis the rules of chess while Charlotte built an elaborate castle with blocks. The contrast with their formal palace life was stark, but the warmth and authenticity of this moment represented everything they had hoped to achieve. "Never," he said firmly, pulling Catherine closer as they watched their children. "We chose love over duty, family over obligation, authenticity over performance. History will judge whether we made the right choice for the monarchy, but I know we made the right choice for our family." Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering their modest property in pristine white. Inside, the Cambridge family, no longer working royals but still bound by love and commitment to each other, had found the grace they had been seeking. Their moment of brave decision-making had led to a life that was smaller in scope, but richer in meaning, simpler in structure but deeper in satisfaction. The embrace they had shared on that dramatic day months earlier, captured by cameras around the world, had symbolized the beginning of this journey. Now, as they sat together in their peaceful home, they understood that they had found what they were really embracing, not just each other, but the possibility of living authentically while still honoring the values that mattered most to them.